I can't believe that I went almost 29 years of life without having read 2001: A Space Odyssey or even watching the film for that matter. 60 years ago, Arthur C. Clarke started writing 2001: A Space Odyssey, adapted from one of his short stories called The Sentinel, and he did this in collaboration with Stanley Kubrick. Instead of just writing the screenplay, Stanley Kubrick decided that it would be better if they wrote a novel so that they could get out all the creative ideas without going into the excruciating detail up front that a screenplay requires. And by Christmas Eve 1964, Arthur C. Clarke gave Stanley Kubrick as an early Christmas gift what he hoped would be a completed rough draft, but really it was only about 2/3 done. However, Kubrick took that 2/3 written draft and then went and got the funding for the film. And before I continue, if you don't know who I am, I'm Victor Hughes. I'm the host of Psychocinematic, the podcast that you're listening to right now. When I'm not interviewing the filmmakers who made these amazing films, I am doing a solo analysis or discussion, comparison between book or movie, anything like that, just because I love this stuff. I am making this video or podcast, if you're just listening, for 3 reasons. 1, I read the book first and then I watched the movie. I had never seen the movie and I had never read the book, but when I did go watch the movie, I quickly recognized that there are things that just didn't get explained at all that if I only watched the movie, I would have been pretty confused. Luckily, those things that I noticed are explained in the book, and I would say that the movie probably covered about 75% of the book, which is pretty good for a movie, honestly. But I thought it'd be a good idea to clear some of those things up. Second, I need to share all of my thoughts on the book and the movie because I can't stop thinking about it. There hasn't been a day that's gone by since I finished the book and then watched the movie that I haven't thought about it. 2001: A Space Odyssey has quickly become what I think is probably now my favorite book and movie, which is nuts. The fact that I've gone my entire life without this thing that I've heard about, just never went and watched. And also, no one had ever spoiled the movie or the book for me. It's great. I had this gem just waiting for me. And the third and final reason is because I want everyone out there who is like me, or especially maybe the younger generation who might not have watched this film yet, go out and check it out, because honestly, I don't know if there is a movie that has been more influential than 2001: A Space Odyssey. So the way I'm going to do this is by basically going in chronological order through the book and comparing it with the movie and kind of clearing up any questions I think might have popped up, as well as highlighting some of the key differences between them. Now, I both read and listened to this book, and in the audiobook, there is a foreword to the foreword from Arthur C. Clarke that was super interesting. I had to listen to it a couple times and take notes on it. So the crucial thing to keep in mind about this book and movie is the fact that they started writing this in the mid-60s, at which point only a couple people had ever been to space and we had not been to the moon yet. Clarke was talking about how JFK said how they wanted to put a man on the moon by the end of the decade, and though people were skeptical, both Clarke and Kubrick wanted to make a movie that wasn't quickly made obsolete because they decided to just go to the moon in the movie. In the book, their final destination is Saturn. In the movie, the final destination is Jupiter. And the reason being is apparently the visual effects team said that they could not do Saturn's ring, which irritated Kubrick understandably. So instead, they just left it at Jupiter. Clarke mentioned that this book came out shortly after the movie came out, but he wanted to clear up any potential misconceptions that this is a novelization of the movie. No, this was the foundation for the movie. The reason the book came out after the movie was because Kubrick had to give a final sign off on it, but he was already in the middle of shooting the movie, so he just didn't have time to finish reviewing the book. I mentioned previously that this book is based off of Arthur C. Clarke's short story called The Sentinel. What's funny about The Sentinel was that he submitted that for a BBC competition and it didn't even place. Now, lo and behold, it's one of the most influential pieces of sci-fi writing. So I had to rent this film on Amazon to watch it. And so when I hit play, it starts off with like 3 minutes of darkness and just a score going on. And I was like, this is really cool. It's making me think of the vastness and emptiness of space. It was a little eerie, but then I started worrying that maybe my TV was glitching out and it was playing only the audio and I'm missing the video. I sat for like 2 minutes and I was like, all right, I'll trust. But then after 2 minutes, I had to see if I fast forward, if there was actually a visual popping up. And this is something that I don't know if it made it onto the original DVD release, because later in the film, there's an actual intermission, which completely caught me off guard, where it's like another 3 minutes of darkness. And so I'm wondering if this is more of like a theater screening. So it starts off with 3 minutes of darkness and then the middle 3 minutes of darkness. After the title cards and this 3 minutes of darkness, one of the first things that we see is the moon, Earth, and sun all lined up, but it starts with the moon. And this is the perfect shot because the main ape in the book is called Moonwatcher. That is his name. That's something that they don't explain in the movie. So it's like perfect because we all start off as the Moonwatcher in the beginning of the film, as we did in the Dawn of Man. So in the novel, during the Dawn of Man, the monolith comes down and it teaches these man apes how to do things. The book says that most of them fail in learning how to do these things, but then some succeed, and the reward is pleasurable, but for everyone else, it's pain. The monolith then shows Moonwatcher a vision of a family fat and fed, and Moonwatcher feels envy for the very first time. Moonwatcher then takes this envy and then learns how to use tools and weapons so that he doesn't have to go a day without food and he can be fat and fed. Something I love about this story is that it seems to be an allegory, a little bit of like the Christian religion. And in this instance, this monolith seems to be like the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. In the story of Adam and Eve, the serpent convinces Eve to eat the fruit from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. That way her mind will be open to be like God and know good and evil. Now, this monolith was sent to Earth as an experiment. In the book, it says that the aliens reached Earth long after the dinosaurs perished, but they saw potential in the life forms that were here. So the monolith is kind of like a fishing rod cast into the water to see which one of these species bites and shows the potential of learning what they have to teach them and can potentially become capable of interplanetary travel. And then that monolith changes the whole trajectory of the human race, which in the story of the Bible, that whole Adam and Eve scene changed the whole trajectory. Now in the film, it doesn't look like any of the man apes are being punished if they can't understand what the monolith wants from them. But man, the storytelling in here is perfect. Watching Moonwatcher learn how to use a bone as a weapon. It's funny, but I'm a little ashamed to say that the first time I guess I got introduced to this Dawn of Man scene was because of the Barbie movie, since Greta Gerwig apparently did like a 1-to-1 shot introduction of, you know, the girls being introduced to a Barbie doll for the first time and then smashing all of their other dolls. I only saw it once in theaters, so I don't remember it more than that. Now in the movie, we see a real leopard attack someone in one of the ape costumes, which just completely blew my mind because you can tell that was straight up real. I learned that they had tranq guns on set, but I did a quick Google search to see, you know, like how long does a tranq dart take to go into effect? And I'm sure it varies based on the weight and the strength of the tranquilizer. But I mean, Google was all over the place. It said like 2 to 11 minutes, but that's plenty of time to die from a leopard who's attacking you. Now in the book, there is a leopard and it tries to attack them while they're in their cave. That leopard ends up getting killed by the man apes. And when they go to that neighboring tribe who lurks around this watering hole, they have the leopard head on a stick and they beat someone to death with this leopard head. And I just thought this idea that the leopard would kill again, even in death, it's a pretty hard thought. Now, a handful of little fun facts I'm going to be sharing in here I got from a YouTube channel called Cinema Tyler. He did a super well done, in-depth breakdown of the production of 2001: A Space Odyssey. He's got like 6 different episodes and each of them is like 30 minutes long, just covering the different sections. But in his breakdown, he was talking about the way they shot this Dawn of Man thing in a studio rather than on location in, say, Africa. They had so many lights in the studio that apparently it was around 100 degrees on average when they're shooting, and people are just in these amazing ape suits. They look great, but the fact that they are having to sit in these suits baking. There was an image they shared in the video of one of the actors on a break. He's still in his suit, but the mouth is being propped open by like a steel bar so that he can breathe better during the downtime. In the book, they fast forward through the evolution of man pretty quick, but this quote got me. It says, "They had learned to speak and so had won their first great victory over time. Now the knowledge of one generation could be handed on to the next so that each age could profit from those that had gone before. It created this image in my mind of a generation passing the baton off to the next generation so that they can race with it. But the baton is made of Legos. Now hear me out. The Legos are knowledge, so each generation is building onto this baton of Legos, and eventually this baton gets so big, it's a ticking time bomb. It's going to shatter or collapse. So I started thinking about that in a national context, how great empires always fall. With knowledge seems to come power and advantage, but then that can only last so long until that civilization, that empire crumbles, and that baton of Legos just breaks. This book was pretty thought-provoking in the sense that they didn't have to say any of that, but that came to my mind. And I love when a book can make you think like this. So you get a sixth of the way through the book, and finally they're not talking about man-apes. I had no idea when I picked up this sci-fi book that I was going to be spending so long in this primitive era. A lot of what the book provides that the movie doesn't is context for the time. So it's 2001, but what does that look like? The book has a lot of explanation there. So in the book, the Earth's population is 6 billion, and it says how authoritarian countries have instituted a two-child policy. I recall China's one-child policy. I had to look it up to see when exactly it was, and it stretched from 1980 all the way to 2016. But then I Googled, had any countries ever done a two-child policy? And it turns out Iran, Singapore, and Vietnam have. All of these countries, however, did not institute this kind of policy before Arthur C. Clarke wrote this book. So he called it. Now I'm going to refer to my notes for this one. It says that they predict famine within 15 years from 2001, so I guess 2016. There are 38 nuclear powers. I had to look up how many nuclear powers there are currently, and there are 9 countries out there who have access to nukes in 2024. In the book, China is offering 50 warheads and delivery systems for under $200 million. The fact they're just selling nuclear bombs to people is like, you could see where this is going. It's going to end in a nuclear conflict. Everyone in the book was cautious of the possibility that China had radial hypnosis through satellite transmitters, compulsion viruses, blackmail, synthetic diseases. Now, even though the US government thought that this was propaganda, they couldn't be too sure. Now, at first I thought that the movie completely omitted this idea of nuclear war at all, frankly, because they didn't explain it. But apparently the ships that you see in the very beginning after the Dawn of Man sequence, those are all atomic satellites. So they've got atomic weapons and they're just circling the Earth waiting for a conflict. There was a voiceover that was originally written in the script that just didn't make it in. And that explains Kubrick's match cut when one of the apes throws up the bones and then it turns into this nuclear satellite, because that was the weapon of the primitive time. And now here we are in 2001, and that is our most lethal weapon. Now in the book, they depict this flight to the space station like some intermediate point between an actual space shuttle and an airplane, which is kind of accurate in the movie as well. The idea that there's a stewardess on a flight like this is just hilarious. And in the movie, when we're watching the stewardess, I was completely mind blown at the fact that they were showing the stewardess walk up the wall, and I had a feeling I knew how they did it, and turns out I was right. And that's on a moving set that they were doing that. It's rotating and she's just walking like normal. But the fact that they were doing this in the 60s, this movie came out in 68, but I believe they began filming in 65. Like, you have to keep that in mind with all of the stuff that they did in the movie. It's nuts. In the movie, we see the stewardess doing her spacewalk. She's in her grip shoes. But I watched an interview of the actress who got that role, and apparently she had a toothache, had just gone to the dentist, and she was really high from painkillers. And when she goes to do this audition with Stanley Kubrick, he's like, all right, let's see the spacewalk. And she's like just struggling to balance. And a week later, she got the call. Yeah, you got the job. You loved that walk. Crazy. So the space station that Floyd gets to is very incredible in the movie, but in the book, it explains more of what that space station has. It says that it has a lounge, a restaurant, a post office, a drugstore, a movie theater, barber shop, and souvenir shop. Now it's funny because after the moon landing in the 60s, you would think that like we would have progressed at least to like half of that, you know, where space travel is just like a pretty common thing. Like maybe there's like a base on the moon and a base on Mars, but we're not there like at all. Now in the book, on the space station, there is a US section and a Soviet section. Now I don't know the exact tone that they felt in the 60s because I didn't live in it, but clearly Arthur C. Clarke thought that the Soviet Union was gonna go the distance. Now one thing about the movie that seemed to be slightly overlooked was the hair and wardrobe. It still feels very 1960s to me. Now I had to walk that original thought back a little bit because apparently the suits that, like all the men are wearing, they don't have any buttons on the outside because they just stick together. That's kind of how they thought that clothing would be in the future. But when you look back through time at the crazy differences in fashion, it just seems like this was too close to the 60s. So in the book, when Floyd is going to the moon, the food looks a little bit different. He's not just drinking food out of pouches like in the movie. In the book, the plates are clipped to the table and then every food is meticulously designed to stick. So you have a chop of meat that is then kind of glued to the plate by some sticky sauce. And then also the salad then has a sticky dressing that is keeping it on the plate or on the bowl. It says that the only things that weren't allowed were flaky pastries, soup, and I believe it said coffee as well. So in the movie, we get this image of Floyd looking at the space bathroom or the gravity bathroom thing, and there's this huge instruction sheet. So in the book, the bathroom is fascinating. They have a little description of how the gravity works. The room spins like a carousel, and it basically simulates a quarter of Earth's gravity, but it says that's enough to have things just sink down like your poop and pee. Also in space, they have these things called a news pad. And the book, I'm going to refer to my notes here. It says it'll give them headlines and stories from newspapers. And the book comments on how archaic newspapers would sound in the tech age, which is funny because we still have newspapers. And yeah, I guess it is kind of archaic still, but some people read them. It says news was updated every hour. And I just laughed at that idea because you could just refresh your page and find some new depressing news that's online whenever you want. Then it says it's hard to imagine how the system could be improved or more convenient, but sooner or later it'd be replaced by something unimaginable. And that unimaginable thing in real life was obviously the smartphone. Floyd in the film goes to use the picture phone. That scene is absolutely incredible, seeing the Earth spinning, or rather he's spinning and the Earth is doing its own thing. But in the book, they call them vision phones. Tiny detail, but still wanted to point it out. Something that the movie left out too is that there are people who are spaceborn. So it has this little girl named Diana who's 4 years old who has only lived on the moon. It describes how her facial features and all that are completely different because of the different gravity, and that she doesn't even want to go to Earth because she says you get hurt when you fall. Now, enter HAL 9000, one of the best villains that I think has ever existed in a film. But that's not really a hot take. HAL 9000, again, I can't remember if it specifies why it's called HAL 9000 in the movie, but it's heuristically programmed algorithmic computer, and he's just an artificially intelligent computer. In the book, it states that HAL passes the Turing test. Now, in the book, when they're talking about HAL 9000, they're talking about breakthroughs in computers, and it says they seem to occur at intervals of 20 years. Now, if that logic holds up, I think in 2027, we're in for a major breakthrough since the iPhone came out in 2007. And if I had to guess, it would just be some major advancement in AI that hopefully doesn't look awful for us, but it's hard for me to actually have hope that we won't just be ran out by AI. In the book, they state that HAL 9000 knows the true mission that they are on, but Bowman and Poole do not. And they state that pretty early on. In the movie, I believe you don't find that out until Bowman has already basically powered down HAL 9000, making him effectively useless, at which point he sees a video from Floyd talking about the true mission. Whereas in the book, when Bowman survives Hal's attempts at killing him and everyone on board, he then is in communication with Floyd directly, which in the book they state how they could communicate with Earth, but there's just an hour delay between messages, so things would just arrive late. In the book, it says how Jupiter has 36 known moons, and I looked it up today to see how many moons Jupiter now has, and it's 95. That's a lot. And it's insane because they also state in the book that Jupiter is heavier than our entire solar system twice. I looked it up online and I believe it said 2.5 times heavier than our entire solar system. That's fucking nuts. It was at this point in reading the book that I just sat and thought about how much I love this book because it was reinvigorating my interest in space. I felt like I haven't had this kind of interest since I first learned about the solar system in, I don't know, like 3rd grade or something like that. So easy to just think about your job, your mortgage, and your problems all down here on the Earth's surface and not look up at the stars. It's unfortunate that we don't do that more. At least I don't, but now I'm trying. It was also at this point that this book prompted this idea in my head. The idea that the Earth, throughout its entirety of its existence, has more or less weighed the same. Basically, the only weight differences, to my knowledge, would be gases leaving and then meteors hitting Earth, thereby adding more rock. It's just, for someone who's not like an astronaut or astrologist or scientist or anything like that, you kind of get this idea that like, oh, 8 billion humans and we're building cars and buildings. That seems like Earth is getting heavier, overloaded by us. But all that matter has been here. Matter is neither created nor destroyed. So it's like that idea just kind of blew my mind. And yes, I was completely sober. So in the book, the pods that they use to take off of the Discovery ship are used to basically work on the ship. And they've got the little arms and they actually use that quite a bit unless they need to do some more fine adjusting of things. And then in which case they'll leave their pod, but they're still attached to the pod. In the movie, they really only use the arms to capture Poole's dead body. And then also to open up that hatch back into the ship when HAL 9000 is not letting them in. So there are some differences between the book and the movie with the AE-35 unit and how this whole sequence of events shakes out with HAL then turning on Poole and Bowman. In the book, HAL notices that there is an impending doom for the AE-35 unit, so they got to go and swap it out. They go and put the second one in there, and then HAL says that it is immediately fried, and now they only have one extra unit. And so instead of just putting that unit in to then become fried immediately again, potentially then severing their communication with Earth, they decide to go and investigate with the first unit and basically see what's up. In the book, there is no secret discussion about how they're going to disconnect HAL when they're trying to hide in the pod and HAL reads their lips. In the book, however, they do say how they might have to disconnect him, and that was the first time he even considered that that was a possibility. And so of course he became panicky. So in the book, the space pod hits Poole's body while he's working on the AE-35 unit. It runs him over and then drags him off to Saturn. The chapter is called First Man to Saturn, which is so dark. The fact that he gets hit by the ship because HAL won't stop it. In the book, Bowman does not go and retrieve his body. I like that version better. It's a lot darker. And in the movie, honestly, that scene took forever. Now back to the book. After Poole gets ran over by a space pod and drug out into space, and now he's definitely dead, HAL says the darkest and coldest line ever just to Bowman when he's basically alone in there, aside from the other astronauts in their hibernaculums where they're asleep waiting for their job to start. HAL says to him, "It's too bad about Frank, isn't it?" You gaslighting motherfucker. This whole time he keeps gaslighting like, "Oh no, like I'm on your side. Like I'm just trying, I didn't do that." Fucking liar. This idea of being the only human alive on a ship with a mad AI computer is terrifying. And I feel like the movie would have benefited from the book sequence of events. In the book, Bowman decides to take one person out of hibernation because, well, he needs the extra help doesn't trust Hal, and also now the food and the resources isn't really an issue with Poole being gone. He's not going to be consuming them. So he starts to take one of the other passengers out of his cryogenic sleep or hibernation, or however they did that. And in the book, they stated how the other 3 passengers in the hibernaculums knew the true mission of the Discovery. And that true mission is to find out more about this extraterrestrial life, who put TMA-1 on the moon, are these aliens friendly? All that. Poole and Bowman were under the impression that they were just going to be documenting and researching about Saturn and Jupiter. And the reason that Poole and Bowman weren't made aware of the true nature of the mission was because they were going to have broadcasts with Earth. So when the AE-35 unit goes down in the book, Earth asks them to do a broadcast with the United States to explain basically, here's what we're doing today. We're replacing this AE-35 unit. It's very safe, really trying to downplay it and, keep the world updated and excited about what's going on with the space mission. So they didn't want Poole and Bowman to be able to share this information with anyone, even the people on the space station. As you saw on the movie or maybe read in the book, there's this pandemic on the moon cover up that they're using to distract from the fact that there's extraterrestrial life forms present. Whereas in the movie, only Hal knows the true mission. I mean, I guess maybe those in the hibernaculum know, but they don't express any of that, and none of them ever come out of their hibernaculums. So I again have to refer to my notes for this, but this was a little confusing and initially unclear in both the book and the movie to me as to why Hal was quote unquote malfunctioning or intentionally trying to sabotage the mission. From my understanding, in the book, Hal was given the orders to aid Poole and Bowman by relaying accurate information, but also to keep the true goal of the mission a secret, which is a major dilemma for Hal because you can't do both of those at the same time. So Hal determines if he kills the crew, his problems would be solved and he could do what he's been told, at least on this end, perfectly, and the other people who are causing the problem in this equation are gone. Whereas in the movie, Hal tries to subtly tell Bowman the truth about the mission in hopes that Bowman would take the bait and investigate further and learn the true goal of the mission, thereby resolving Hal's internal battle. If they're made aware about the true nature, Hal can then go along with his day-to-day functions of trying to get the Discovery to, in the movie, Jupiter. But Hal was risking being reprimanded or disconnected by those on the moon and on Earth if Poole and Bowman didn't take the bait and believe him. And so after Bowman didn't take the bait, he immediately fabricated the AE-35 error to sever the communications with Earth just long enough for either them to actually take the bait and learn about the true goal of the mission, or the more likely option, just kill off Poole and Bowman while the communications were down, thereby resolving that problem and Bowman's arising suspicion that Hal is malfunctioning and needs to be disconnected. That was by far the most confusing part for me because there were parts that made sense, but neither the book nor movie felt extremely clear as to why. And they both have slight differences in them, but I wanted to communicate that. I hope I did that effectively for you. So in the book, the way Hal fucks over everyone is he takes matters into his own hands and opens up the airlock himself. Basically killing everyone in there except Bowman, including the guy who's getting out of the hibernaculum. He's literally just waking up and then just gets sucked out. Are you kidding me? That fucking sucks. But Bowman was able to make it into a tiny room that had some oxygen, and he was able to survive. Now in the movie, Bowman is outside trying to return with Poole's body, and then he has to open up the airlock himself and then race across the room and, basically pressurize the area again. In the book too, this idea of oxygen is a major stake because he has so much time left in this trip and only so much oxygen. And so Bowman in the book really struggles with that. So I unfortunately, again, can't remember if they explicitly explained this part in the movie, but TMA-1, the monolith that was placed on the moon, it was placed there because the aliens knew that if these man-apes eventually evolved enough to get off Earth, the first place they're probably going to go is the moon. And TMA-1 was releasing this signal that was like painfully obvious for the humans to find. And as soon as TMA-1 was uncovered and then saw its first glimpse of sunlight, it sent out a signal directly to Saturn. In the movie, that's when they're taking the picture and then everyone's reacting to the signal that's happening. So essentially the monolith was just an alarm for the aliens to know when humans made it off Earth. When I was reading the book and the whole Hal situation got resolved, I was like, oh my God, I forgot that there's even aliens in this book. They really took two major, amazing stories and put them in the same book and the same movie. Absolutely crazy. So in this book, they also give you this information about the aliens that the movie does not. So, the aliens came to Earth after the dinosaurs are gone. They saw all the life. They studied, meddled, and tinkered. They didn't know who might take to the knowledge that they were giving. And they knew they would take over 1 million years to see if any of these species could make it off Earth. And in the meantime, they continued exploring the universe and experimenting. And it says they shed their fleshy bodies for machines and then eventually just became energy that could roam the universe. And it says that they still watch their experiments. And again, back to the allegory of the Christian religion, I know that these aliens didn't create humans, but they kind of created what we know to be humans in this story, because otherwise we would have just been man-apes who are fighting leopards. More stakes that aren't really mentioned in the movie is this whole thing of gravity and orbit. There was a whole specific timing to the trip. In the book, they're using Jupiter's gravity to slingshot them off to Saturn. And then once Bowman reaches Saturn, everything is particular to be able to make it to the massive monolith, which they call TMA-1's big brother, also known as the Stargate. They explain in the book that Saturn's ring was created when TMA-1's big brother shattered a moon once it got there, and all that space debris is just floating around Saturn and has been there for roughly 3 million years, which was saying that that's about the time of the human existence and wasn't going to be there forever, that those rings were just temporary. This was the best part of the book for me, when Bowman goes to investigate TMA-1's big brother, the Stargate, the wormhole. It is so good. I had to listen to it multiple times, physically read it a couple times, because it was just so intense, so much information and creativity. So in the book, TMA-1's big brother is 2,000 feet tall and it's on a white moon. And so it looks like an eye. You got a white circle with just this black dot on it. And he needs to go and take the pod down there and attempt to land on it. And when he goes to land on it, it acts almost like an optical illusion where he thought he could land on top of it, but now it's just sucking him inside of the monolith and it turns into like an elevator shaft and he begins to fall through this wormhole. The book even kind of explains that wormhole a little bit like hyperspeed or hyperspace in Star Wars. Sorry, all the mega Star Wars fans. I can't remember if it's hyperspace or hyperspeed. And I've heard George Lucas say that he was very inspired by 2001: A Space Odyssey. And you can clearly see that from some of the imagery in the film as well. Like if I put up this image and I asked anyone, what movie is this from? They will probably say Star Wars, but in fact, it's 2001: A Space Odyssey. So back to the book, Bowman goes through the wormhole and it's basically like a film negative of space once he makes it all the way through. So it's a white sky with black stars and he sees so many more monoliths. He sees this like space parking lot. It's a structure that's just there with like abandoned ships. It looks abandoned, and another spaceship's coming by, a golden spindly thing that's now going into another wormhole. And he's just traversing this, but he's being dragged into another wormhole. Being able to hear Bowman's internal thoughts really added to the stakes. He eventually became comfortable because he's like, I've made it this far. Clearly there's something pulling me in a certain direction. And all I can do is just sit here, rather than in the movie when you're just kind of staring at his eyes and then like these sweeping landscapes with, like all these inverted colors. It was cool, but I liked the book a lot more. I will say the movie really nailed that liquid emulsion look. That was awesome. So back to the book, when he's shot out the second wormhole, he shot out towards a red sun. But then that red sun eventually just kind of like fades off into the hotel room that you then see in the movie. But when Bowman's ship arrives in the hotel room in the book, he basically spends a while investigating the room and, like checking out the food in the fridge and all this stuff. And then he goes to sleep because he's exhausted. And then he wakes up as a baby. And now this is where I feel that the movie did a lot better. And again, with the allegory of the Christian religion, Bowman is basically aging very quick, dying to be born again. The monolith is now at the foot of the bed and Bowman is an old man. And there is a clear depiction of the creation of Adam, the painting in the Sistine Chapel where they're touching fingers because Bowman's out there and then he turns into a baby, almost like baby Jesus. And now he is known in the book as the Star Child. And he returns to Earth for a reason that they do not express in the movie, which probably left a lot of people, I would imagine, like bewildered and confused and maybe frustrated. He returns to Earth because he's there to intervene in the imminent nuclear war that's about to pop off. And because he is now like a god in training, he has the power to do what these other aliens are doing, it seems, and traverse the universe. And he has the power to stop what's going to happen to his home planet. And that's where the book leaves you. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching. I'm so glad I finally got to record that episode of the podcast because I've been dying to share this with you. And I'd be lying if I said that this wasn't one of the most exhausting preps that I've ever done for any of my podcasts. I mean, look at my notes. Jesus. Anyway, thank you again for watching this episode covering 2001: A Space Odyssey. I hope you enjoyed it and I'll see you in the next one.